Part of the fun of science fiction is imagining what sorts of weird and wild stuff people will have in the future, including clothes. But sometimes costume designers have gone just a little too far, even for sci-fi.
Designer Jean-Paul Gaultier, known as an enfant terrible of the fashion world, created more than 1,000 different pieces for 1997's The Fifth Element. He dressed everyone in elaborate costuming, from stars Bruce Willis and Mila Jovovich to background extras with only seconds of screen time. The most famous outfit for the film, however, is the bandage costume worn by Jovovich for her character Lilu. While the costume became instantly iconic, Jovovich's own public statements about the look have shifted over the years. On the occasion of the film's 20th anniversary, the former supermodel and future sci-fi mainstay told Vogue, "I think our team did the most incredible job with all the costumes, but especially Lilu. That just became the most unique costume that anyone had ever seen in a sci-fi movie at that point." However, around the time of the film's release, Jovovich had told Entertainment Weekly that her infamous bandages were a bit embarrassing. Moreover, the costume led to the actor being harassed on set. She also insisted that fans should be watching the film for Lilu's character and not her looks, telling the magazine that, despite all appearances, it's not really about her clothes. Throughout Jurassic World, manly man Chris Pratt repeatedly belittles the more steely, hyper-feminine Bryce Dallas Howard's choice of outfit. More specifically, he focuses often on her high heels, telling her that her footwear is impractical for traipsing around a dinosaur-filled island.
You'll last 2 minutes in there. Less in those ridiculous shoes.
True as that may be, Howard's character Claire elects to keep them on, insisting that her outfit doesn't have anything to do with her strength or ability to outrun dinos. She puts that to the test in the climax of the film, when, in the much derided scene, she takes off running from a massive T-Rex, heels stomping the ground in slow-mo, like she's walking the runway on RuPaul's Drag Race. So strong was the backlash to the scene that Pratt decided to prove himself capable of running in heels too, which he did on The Late Late Show with James Corden. Howard also defended the character's fashion choice in an interview with Yahoo Movies, explaining that it simply isn't practical for Claire to waste time taking off her shoes when she's perfectly capable of running in them, as the actor did herself on set. Howard said, "I don't think she would choose to be barefoot. I don't think she would run faster barefoot in the jungle with vines and stones. I'm better equipped to run when I have shoes on my feet, so that's my perspective on it."
David Lynch's 1984 Dune adaptation elicits mixed responses at best, but regardless of a viewer's reaction to the storytelling, few would deny its production design is awesome to behold, even if it's not always true to Frank Herbert's book. With an H.R. Giger-inspired biomechanical design, costume designer Bob Ringwood's moisture-conserving stillsuits featured in the film seem like an elaborately direct precursor to his work on his batsuit design for the Tim Burton Batman films. By comparison, when Denis Villeneuve mounted his production of Dune, the stillsuits looked quite lazy by comparison. This iteration of the design looked more like regular clothes with extra bits glued on, rather than form-fitting survival devices. The general idea was to make the stillsuits look more like something actual desert tribes wear today than to look explicitly futuristic and alien. Villeneuve got so much right that in the end, complaints about the costumes faded away, and the movie won 6 Oscars. Unfortunately, none of those victories were for costume design. After 2 movies as a strong leader who is more competent than the male heroes assigned to rescue her, Princess Leia Organa got captured and stripped down to a gold bikini by Jabba the Hutt in Return of the Jedi. As Star Wars is one of the most iconic sci-fi franchises in history, this costume has already been heavily scrutinized and parodied in the media.
Is there a picture of you in my wallet wearing a metal bikini? God, I hope not.
Over a decade later, Kenner Hasbro finally made an action figure of Leia in the getup, and though it was officially labeled Princess Leia Organa as Jabba's prisoner, the fans quickly dubbed it Slave Leia. The first iteration of the figure proved hugely popular with collectors, though after a while the appeal died down. After Disney took over Star Wars, they quietly started phasing out that particular look in merchandise. For her part, the late Carrie Fisher surely had feelings of her own on the costume, but when asked by the Wall Street Journal in 2015 how she would explain the outfit to kids, she gave a very tactful answer. "Tell them that a giant slug captured me and forced me to wear that stupid outfit, and then I killed him because I didn't like it, and then I took it off, backstage." Taking a cue from Fisher's sentiment about the bikini, Disney ultimately began describing Leia in that outfit as Hutt Slayer rather than a captive or slave.
Armor is meant to be protective, not decorative, no matter what your MMORPG-addicted buddies say. Thus, functionality is key, and little in Star Wars is as exquisitely functional as Mandalorian armor. The Armorer is proof. When we meet her in The Mandalorian, her hand-forged matte bronze Beskar chest piece has some geometric shape to mold to her form, but it's visually genderless. However, Bo-Katan's live-action reveal brought something extra from her time on the Clone Wars. The Night Owl leader and former Death Watch member had some extra curves in her Beskar blues, and fans instantly took note. While the attention to detail is laudable, it's still visually out of place with her peers. Have we learned nothing from The Mandalorian and Dredd? A good actor can carry a performance with body language and tone alone. New Master Chief Pablo Schreiber is a good actor, but the first season of Halo had him taking that helmet off all the time. Schreiber was among the first to defend 343's intention to reveal John 117's face, and his argument is a good one. Schreiber says the intention was to tell a human story about a character who's
exploring his own identity, about the effects of war on the society and the effects of war on the individual.
Creating an emotional and visual distinction between the show's canon and the game should have helped longtime fans know that their own Master Chiefs are untouched. However, that wasn't enough for the audience, even with a season finale that gives John a reason to put the helmet back on and keep it on. The backlash was severe enough to spawn tons of arguments and think pieces across the web, and with enough problems with its plot to keep Halo fans evenly steamed, including a relationship with a prisoner of war, the helmet became a symbol of what happens when you mess with core iconography. It wasn't just about revealing the Chief's face, it was about peeling too much off of the original and replacing it with something too unsteady to stand on its own.
Ridley Scott's masterpiece horror movie Alien includes a number of superb sci-fi costumes, not least of which was the horrific xenomorph suit worn by actor Balaji Badejo. One of its more enduring looks also happens to be one of its simplest. In the third act of the film, Sigourney Weaver's Ripley shimmies out of her clothes, stripping down to a shirt and underwear. At first, Weaver was all for this, even suggesting that her character should have gone a little further. In an interview with Films and Filming magazine, Weaver said, "You see the alien in its birthday suit the entire film, so I thought it was a cop-out having me wear the underwear and not stripping entirely." However, she noted that she had received backlash for the costume, including people who said she had demeaned herself by performing the scenes. Weaver claimed, "It never occurred to me for a second that people would think my strip exploitive." Weaver isn't the only one who's now less than enthusiastic about the costuming choice. Director James Cameron, who helmed Aliens, has also criticized the underwear sequence. In an interview with News.com, Cameron said he made an effort to not do the same thing in a sequel. When The Matrix hit cinemas in 1999, the world hadn't seen anything like it. The Wachowskis pioneered bullet time, made Keanu Reeves a mega star, and brought Hong Kong-style wire action sequences fully into the American mainstream. And they did it all while outfitting their characters in some seriously badass leather.
Whoa.
In short, The Matrix was cool, one of the highest compliments you could give something in the 90s. At the time, one fan wrote, "The Matrix is so cool, it's not even funny. This has to be one of the coolest flicks of the decade." However, the film's instantly iconic style also sparked a moral panic about whether its trench coats were inspiring kids to violence. Several weeks after the release of The Matrix, the United States was rocked by the Columbine shooting, carried out by two teens who were said to be a part of a nefarious group the media called the Trenchcoat Mafia. The shooting's supposed connection to the killer's fashion choices made international headlines. This was debunked later, of course, but the fact that the Columbine killers were not actually part of the Trenchcoat Mafia gaming community didn't matter. By 2003, ABC News was asked if The Matrix and his costumes had inspired violent or mentally disturbed individuals to act out their fantasies. The answer, of course, is probably not.
When the first X-Men movie came out in 2000, the studio believed the public wouldn't be interested in brightly colored spandex costumes. Instead, the production dressed the team in black leather, much like filmmakers had done with Blade, in the surprisingly successful 1998 film iteration of the Marvel Vampire Slayer. By 2014, however, this trend had come to an end. So, when the Robocop remake came out that year, the lead character's makeover in an all-black Robo body just seemed silly rather than edgy. Fans also wondered why he kept a normal-looking flesh and blood hand attached to his powerful cybernetic body. The movie never addresses it in the theatrical cut, but there are actually two explanations for Robocop's newly human hand. One is a visual metaphor. A human hand on the trigger of a police gun is meant to reassure the public that he's not a soulless machine. A deleted scene from the film offers a more superficial explanation, that Raymond Sellers believes in the ability to judge a man by his handshake and wants to ensure Alex Murphy can still deliver on this social contract.
Hey, can you save his right hand? My father always said you can tell a lot about a man by his handshake.
The film itself expresses neither of these, and in the end does the audience the favor of giving Robocop a silvery makeover to match the original. Between the 1969 premiere of the final episode of the original Star Trek series and the first movie's 1979 release, both real-world and sci-fi fashion changed a lot. In the wake of 2001: A Space Odyssey and Star Wars, bright red miniskirts weren't going to cut it in a serious intergalactic adventure. Though less garish, the Starfleet uniforms dreamed up for Star Trek, the motion picture, have failed to stand the test of time any better than their counterparts on the TV series. Tans and beiges didn't prove to be particularly attractive uniform colors, and some of the faux naval touches looked more like Carnival Cruise uniforms. What's more, the decision to sew the shoes into the pant legs resulted in pointless difficulty while changing. As costume critic Gavia Baker-Whitelaw succinctly highlighted in her blog, Hello Taylor, it's the sheer impracticality from both a production and viewer standpoint that really sets these uniforms apart. It seems that the public's opinion on this matter was also shared by the cast. In William Shatner's autobiography, he also pointed out that the uniform got far too tight when the men tried to sit down.
Impossible.
Thankfully for all involved, the sequel's attempt at Navy-style formal wear proved much more popular all around.
In 1966, miniskirts weren't just fashionable. They meant something to women fighting for liberation, agency, and the right to police their own bodies and sexuality. Today, fans unaware of the fashion's complicated history may find it easy to look back on the outfits Nichelle Nichols and Grace Lee Whitney wore on Star Trek and assume a sexist mindset demanded the skimpy skirts. That's not the truth. Watching the original pilot, The Cage, shows that everyone was going to wear the same uniform. While the networks allegedly demanded a change, the women in costumer William Ware T.S. picked up on the future's sexiest trend. It's a historical choice that impacted Rebecca Romijn when it came time to dress the crew of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, and she went straight to a fashionable version of the classic mini dress, turning it into a comfortable and practical uniform anyone can wear. Seen occasionally in the first season and later hailed by Boimler on lower decks, this spandex mini dress can look good on anyone, so long as they are brave enough to cope with a bunch of whining about the wokeness of it all. While Captain Picard was busy fixing his shirt, Deanna Troi also fell victim to the wardrobe department in early seasons of Star Trek The Next Generation. Early series drafts show that Troi was meant to be a cerebral and exotic figure, far from the warm, intuitive portrayal actor Marina Sirtis gives us. With writers unsure how to display her empathetic gifts in those early years, and Gene Roddenberry's infamous horniness leading towards a sexier and unfortunately more brainless Troi, she got stuck wearing everything but a traditional Starfleet uniform.
I'm sorry.
Her original costume, not counting Encounter at Farpoint, with its pilot weirdness, was a casual-duty unitard that went through various colors. She started off with a tight beehive and bedazzled hairdo that looked more Bride of Frankenstein than Deep Space Explorer. Star Trek fans still love Troi for her insight and kindness, but they quietly cheered when Captain Jellicoe gave her an excuse to switch to a traditional Starfleet uniform in Chain of Command. As Sirtis complained, "When the cleavage came, I became decorative, like a potted palm on the bridge." To us, Deanna Troi is much more than that.
Studios like to release a glimpse of their tentpole films far in advance, hopefully getting fans excited about upcoming blockbuster releases through a look at a special effects shot, an iconic star, or sometimes a costume. Such was the case when Sony Pictures released an image back in 2017 of the main characters in Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle. The image depicted Kevin Hart, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, Karen Gillan, and Jack Black standing in the titular jungle. Instead of getting audiences hyped for the movie though, fans were surprised by how much skin Gillan's costume showed off. Her ultra-short shorts and ultra-cropped crop top seemed rather impractical as an outfit for jungle foraging.
Why am I wearing this outfit in a jungle? Tiny little shorts and a leather halter top. I mean, what is this?
The Hollywood Reporter published a piece putting forward theories as to why Gillan is so scantily clad in the film, with the outlet wondering if the plot involved setting the gender equality fight back 20 years. Gillan responded online about the outfit saying, "Yes, I'm wearing child-sized clothes, and yes, there is a reason. The payoff is worth it, I promise." The star was teasing the film's plot point that she plays an in-universe video game character. SlashFilm writer Ethan Anderton got it right back in 2016, noting after the film's first look was released that Karen Gillan is clearly a makeshift Lara Croft. Luc Besson's Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets is mostly remembered for being a very expensive flop, but it's quite a fun slice of flashy sci-fi deserving of another look. At the time of its release, however, Valerian was controversial for more than just its poor reviews and awful box office returns. Model Cara Delevingne was cast to play Sergeant Laureline, the sidekick to Dane DeHaan's Major Valerian. While some reviews noted that both her acting and her chemistry with DeHaan left something to be desired, others argued that her wide-eyed, eager performance added something to the wonderful trashiness of it all. Delevingne's armored costume made headlines ahead of the film's release, too, with fans of the original comics noting that Laureline's outfit in a first-look image was bustier than it should be. An editorial in Metro UK typified the backlash, calling the gendered outfit annoying, and comparing the look unfavorably to Captain Phasma's far more androgynous armor in The Force Awakens.
For a character based on a kid's toy line, G.I Joe villain Baroness appeals to some very adult sensibilities, usually clad in skin-tight armor or leather, with long black hair, ruby red lips, and glasses. She certainly has a sensual aesthetic. Many higher-end collectibles emphasize this erotically charged combo, and it's a popular look for cosplayers who can pull it off. Stephen Sommers, who directed 2009's G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra, didn't seem overly concerned about having the characters look like their toy counterparts, and in the case of the Baroness, he seemed to have missed her appeal completely. Rather than giving her librarian specs that frame her eyes, Sienna Miller's Baroness mostly wears auto-darkening sunglasses. Additionally, her not especially contoured bodysuit is hidden under a trench coat half the time. Perhaps Sommers was inspired by the classy looks of The Matrix, but fans were less than enthused about his treatment of the character. While there were elements of her character in the film that detracted heavily from the bad girl reputation she'd built up in the past, the misinterpretation of her costume was the most obvious sign that she was a Baroness in name only. For everything else he got wrong, at least Robert Schwentke's 2021 installation Snake Eyes gave fans a recognizable version of Cobra's favorite bad girl once again.
We still love FireFly, and that's okay. Keep your Jane hats and brown coats. But this two-short cult series has serious flaws that grow bigger with time. FireFly earns a place in the same breath as Blade Runner, and not for good reasons. Futuristic sci-fi stories love to use a cutting-edge neon noir aesthetic that often means borrowing from places like Tokyo and Hong Kong, where the future already seems to exist. FireFly does the same, building a world peppered with Chinese language, occasional Asian-themed fabrics and silks, and, well, the whole Companions Guild thing, which borrows from geisha. This transformed Inara from what creator Joss Whedon tastefully calls in Serenity the official visual companion, a whore, into the most educated person on the ship, instead of just an oppressed, pathetic creature. Anyway, for a future where China won a cultural and capitalist war for Earth, there's a troubling lack of Asian people. In Doctor Who, Time Lords are capable of physical regeneration to avoid death. Because that includes regenerating the brain, reborn Time Lords keep their memories but spawn new personalities. It's a clever way to handle actor transitions, and seeing a new Doctor wearing their last incarnation's clothes is a big deal for Whovians. Note those details. The regeneration only affects the biological form, with the exception of the first regeneration in 1966. So why, in October 2022, did the new 14th Doctor regenerate in the 10th incarnation's clothes? Well, it was because showrunner Russell T Davies didn't want to make David Tennant dress in drag.
What?
What's more RuPaul's Drag Race than the 13th Doctor's orange suspenders, baggy pants, striped blue shirt, and jacket? To be fair, Davies offered his reasoning for the change as an attempt to avoid giving bigots ammo, which is a decent reason. But changing the rules of regeneration to try and silence transphobes ended up upsetting a lot of fans. It's a situation with no great solution.
Captain America has gone through multiple costumes in the MCU, many of which were inspired by the looks he sported throughout the decades in the comics. The very first suit he donned in Captain America: The First Avenger was intentionally cheesy and dated, paying tribute to his 1940s comic book introduction. However, once he got fed up with selling war bonds and decided to join the war effort, Cap opted for something more rugged, similar to what he wore in the Ultimates comics. While on the run from the authorities after his fallout with Iron Man in Civil War, Cap adorned himself with a darker style, reflecting his nomad persona. And it was in Avengers Endgame that he finally donned the iconic scale mail he'd been wearing since his earliest comic days. However, there's one Captain America costume that fans weren't happy with. The one he wore in the first Avengers movie. Within the movie, S.H.I.E.L.D. agent Phil Coulson claims that he had a hand in its design, and considering his deep love for Cap, it's completely fair to put the blame squarely on him for the annoyingly cartoony appearance. Marvel Studios is often blamed for making its heroes' costumes too busy and grounded in an attempt to make them more practical. However, this iteration of Cap's suit saw the studio commit the exact opposite sin.
I understood that reference.
Baron Zemo is a longtime Captain America villain and a high-ranking Hydra leader who always shows up with a different plan to conquer the world. His MCU counterpart is quite a bit different. Zemo first appeared in Captain America: Civil War as a Sokovian soldier who blames the Avengers for his family's death after their battle with Ultron devastated their country. He returns in the Disney Plus series The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, in which he's recruited to help track down the Flag Smashers. Zemo donned two outfits that failed to do his iconic comic book look justice. Civil War mostly sees him wearing regular clothes, prompting many fans to wonder why he was even in the film, as he was such a departure from the way he's portrayed in the source material. For the Disney Plus series, he eventually puts on a purple mask that brings him a little closer to his original look, but it's only for one scene and did little to thrill fans with enthusiastic recognition. Marvel's failure to recreate the villain's suit was pointed out by Game Rant's Adeola Adeoye, who wrote, "Marvel's villains feature some of the least live-action friendly designs in the comic universe. Baron Zemo, however, isn't exactly one of them. His full suit is a bit much for the MCU, but his general color scheme and theming should have been fairly easy to adapt."
For what it's worth, I'm sorry.
Adam Warlock is another Marvel Comics character who's been relatively unknown to mainstream audiences. Mostly relegated to the cosmic side of the comic book universe, Adam is a being who was synthetically created to be the next step in human evolution. He also plays a major role in such beloved storylines as The Infinity Gauntlet and Annihilation Conquest. The character made his live-action debut in 2023's Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, played by Will Poulter. In the film, he's the creation of Aisha, who sends him to get revenge on the Guardians, only for him to end up as a member of the team. The MCU version of Adam Warlock borrows much of his backstory from the comics, which is also the source of his costume's red and gold color scheme. However, in true Marvel fashion, his suit is given far too much detail in the form of tactical armor, replacing the traditional superhero spandex. Fans weren't terribly fond of the militaristic stylings given to the character, who was historically so powerful that he didn't need additional padding to bulk him up. At least the film's costume designers kept his cape and forehead gem. It's rather humorous how everyone thought a crystal embedded in someone's skull wasn't too weird, but red underwear somehow crossed the line.
Between Tim Burton's first Batman and Batman Returns, Michael Keaton's Batsuit evolved from looking like an organic physique to plated armor. When Joel Schumacher took over as director for Batman Forever, the design reverted back to a more anatomical look. Emulating classical statues, Val Kilmer's initial Batsuit infamously sported nipples and a sculpted butt. However, perhaps because he reverted to an armor-styled sonar suit for the climax, fans really seemed to reserve their ire for the subsequent film, Batman and Robin. In this installment, George Clooney's bat nipples appeared to be even more on display. Costume designer Jose Fernandez explained to Deserto that his designs for Kilmer's look in Batman Forever specifically were actually an homage to Roman armor and the borderline nudity brought out by many of the skin-tight costumes from the comic books. He also noted that making the suit a lighter color for Clooney made the nipples more pronounced. Schumacher, a gay man and former costume designer himself, defended his vision, telling Premiere magazine in 1995, "It's my Gotham City, and if I want Batman to have nipples, he's going to have nipples." Considering fans were relatively quiet about Alicia Silverstone's sculpted armor as Batgirl, there's certainly a case to be made that homophobia played a part in the great bat nipple panic of the 90s. When Warner Brothers initially proposed a Catwoman movie, the idea was that it should star Michelle Pfeiffer in that stitched-up vinyl outfit from Batman Returns. However, by the time the film came out, the concept had devolved into Halle Berry dressed up like a psychotic hamster in a bikini. Well, unlike some of the other costume designers on this list, Berry's costume designer Angus Strothy seemed pretty satisfied with his work, telling Cinema Review, "There were so many elements to take into consideration because the catsuit is such a distinctive, almost historical costume. We did want to pay some homage to the other Catwomen, and I think we achieved a wonderful blend of the past and the not-too-distant future." While making the film, director Pitoff didn't feel bound by existing continuity, and parental backlash to the perceived sexuality of Pfeiffer's version didn't exactly help with creating a more faithful adaptation to the comic book character. The movie's Catwoman was an all-new creation named Patience Phillips, in a city that definitely didn't resemble Gotham. It's possible that, due to these many changes from the source material, the movie did not become a blockbuster. Even so, it won Barry a Razzie Award the same year she won the Oscar for Monsters Ball. In comics, the Joker is generally a skinny, dapper fellow with purple coattails and a face transformed by chemical exposure to have white skin and green hair. Jack Nicholson's 1989 movie version stuck pretty closely to that look, as did Cesar Romero on the 1966 TV show. When fans first glimpsed Heath Ledger in clips from The Dark Knight, however, several aspects seemed off.
Well, you look nervous. Is it the scars? You want to know how I got them?
Rather than a bright splash of color against the darkness of Gotham City, Ledger wore a more muted purple, and the clown hair and face came from sloppily applied dye and makeup. However, once the movie came out and Ledger's actual performance nailed the clown Prince of Crime's personality, fans rejoiced. In the process, Ledger made cinematic history and ultimately earned himself a posthumous Oscar. Fans again worried when images of Jared Leto's Joker first hit the web, complete with the LA gangster aesthetic favored by Suicide Squad director David Ayer. Covered in tattoos and sporting a grill, he came across like he was trying to cosplay as a SoundCloud rapper. The logic behind this character's look was that, after he killed Robin, Batman knocked his teeth out, prompting the damaged tattoo on his forehead. Suicide Squad fared well at the box office, though was largely panned by critics.
Whiplash from Iron Man 2 is sort of a composite of the comic book character of the same name and the Crimson Dynamo, both of whom were longtime nemeses of Tony Stark. In the film, Whiplash is Ivan Benko, the son of a Russian scientist who worked with Tony Stark's father decades earlier, before getting kicked out of the US for illegally selling advanced technology. Either Ivan doesn't know that his father was a criminal, or he doesn't care here. He sets out to get revenge on Stark, believing that the best way to do that is arm himself with some dangerous tech. Whiplash's first attempt to take down Iron Man is a little short in the style department, as he attacks wearing bright orange pants, a couple of electrical whips, and that is it. Other than the whips, nothing about it is based on his comic book counterparts, but fans would have been more forgiving of it if it had led to something greater later. It did not. Instead, we got a bland, bulky ripoff of an Iron Man suit whose only saving grace is that it is barely in the film. As Hamilton Parker wrote for comicbookmovie.com, his final appearance, which received a laughably short amount of screen time, is so generic that it's hard to remember what Whiplash even looked like when he finally donned his own suit of armor. Malekith has been plaguing the God of Thunder in the comics for decades, so fans were looking forward to his live-action debut in Thor: The Dark World. Played by Christopher Eccleston, the cinematic version of Malekith and his Dark Elf brethren have been in suspended animation for a millennia following a battle with Odin's father and the Asgardians. However, once Jane Foster is exposed to the ether, Malekith and his army are reawakened. The ensuing attack on Asgard leads to the murder of Thor's mother, Frigga. Thor ultimately thwarts Malekith with the help of his brother Loki. Despite being played by the immensely talented Eccleston, Malekith has gone down as one of the worst MCU villains ever. Not only was he devoid of personality or a compelling arc, he looked absolutely nothing like his comic book counterpart. Instead of the sinister black and white face and wild heavy metal hairdo, the audience received a strange-looking humanoid with pale skin and tied-back hair. Screen Rant's Quinn Lewandowski said, Malekith spent most of the movie with bright white skin and hair that washed out visual definition, only to receive a climactic burn somewhat mirroring his two-toned comic appearance. Instead, all we got was a tiny tease of what the character could have been, but that amounted to little more than an insult to comic book fans. The Eternals were never anyone's favorite characters, mostly due to the fact that they occupied such a small place in the Marvel Comics pantheon. Other than a handful of dedicated series, the race of humanoid space gods appeared only sporadically in other titles since comic book legend Jack Kirby created them in the 1970s. On its surface, bringing such obscure characters to the big screen was a bold move on Marvel Studios' part, but since they were riding high on the gargantuan success of Avengers Endgame, who could blame them for taking such a risk? Well, it turns out that their risk didn't pay off. The film received a mixed reaction from audiences, due in no small part to its predictable plot and boring characters. Of course, the Eternals' bland fashion sense did little to make them stand out from the rest of the MCU's growing roster of heroes. As one Reddit user pointed out, at some point you really start to notice how a lot of the Marvel Cinematic Universe's costumes just feel the same. Whether your character is an alien god, a space pirate, or just a human billionaire, you all shop at the same outlet. One would hope that immortal gods who have been around since the birth of humanity would be treated with a little more respect.
You like the costume?
We need to talk.
Tell the director I have some notes for him.
We need to talk to you in private.
When Jennifer Lawrence stepped into the role of Mystique for X-Men First Class, the character's sleek look was one of the best things about the film. Unfortunately, it seems that the prosthetics and body paint were too much for the actor to deal with. She later told Jimmy Fallon that it originally took 8 hours to apply the costume, and that they'd gotten it down to 3 in time for the sequel, X-Men Days of Future Past.
You just have to sit there, right?
Well, I stood or I had to sit on a bicycle seat. Which every woman knows is our dream come true.
By X-Men Apocalypse, Lawrence was sick of it, and she told Entertainment Weekly she was thinking about bowing out of the franchise because of the character's complicated costuming. Lawrence told the outlet, "I'm like, I can't even pronounce this, and that's going in my nose? I'm breathing that?" Fox worked out a compromise to get Lawrence in the franchise's closing chapter, Dark Phoenix, but it wound up stoking more than a little controversy. Mystique's full body paint and prosthetics were reduced to the sort of blue face paint and cheap-looking wig that you might buy from a Halloween store. Less Mystique, more superhero Team Blue Lady. Fans inevitably took to Twitter to voice their disappointment. One frustrated tweet read, "Jennifer Lawrence's Mystique makes me sad. The Mystique design now is a joke. The character deserves better." Patty Jenkins' Wonder Woman was praised by fans and critics alike, with many singling out the film's feminist take on its central characters, almost all of whom were women. In particular, the costumes won a lot of praise. In a rare win for the genre, the battle armor for the residents of Themyscira actually seemed like armor. Later that very same year, however, when those characters returned in Justice League, fans were quick to point out that the armor had changed. Film critic Asa T shared a side-by-side comparison on Twitter, showing the costumes in Wonder Woman right up against the skimpier ones in Justice League. They pointed out that the original version was designed by Lindy Hemming, a woman, while the ab-bearing bikini variants were created by Michael Wilkinson. Even actor Jessica Chastain chimed in on the controversy, writing in a since-deleted tweet, "Hey men, what would you wear to fight? Hint, don't expose your vital organs." One of the Amazon warriors defended the costume while speaking with USA Today, however. Brooke Ent said, "The girls on set, we never thought of the new costumes as a sexy version. It felt a little more glamorous, if anything, because we had bigger, beautiful hair, which I loved."
DC Comics Starfire, real name Coriander, is a powerful young woman from an alien world. Despite her youth, her views on romantic and sexual relationships are healthy, inclusive, and accepting. Depending on the artist and writer, of course, some fans forget that they're dealing with a character who girls look up to and not a cartoon sex symbol. When Titans hit HBO Max in 2018, some fans went ballistic. We can't ignore that Starfire's actor Anna Jope underwent a deluge of harassment that did include her costume, but had much more to do with fandom racism. Jope is a Senegalese woman raised in America, and her skin tone gave Starfire a refreshing vibrancy. HBO Max's Starfire has a colorful, form-fitting costume that's a far cry from the comic book's sexualized outfits, and her casual wear includes her signature purples. Racist fans derided this, accusing the Titan star of looking like a, quote, hooker in her fur coat-clad introduction, with all the cultural baggage included. Racism, sexism, and cultural stigma collide because some people are terrible. The Boys is satire. Unfortunately, some fans still need reminders. Homelander isn't a patriotic role model, A-Train isn't a responsible adult, and Starlight is a warning about over-sexualized female characters. Created by writer Garth Ennis and artist Derek Robertson, the comic series gives discussing these themes a good shot but doesn't always nail it. Its biggest crime is against Starlight, who ends up just as sexualized but with the addition of a lot of sexual abuse. The Amazon series succeeds at improving on the original messages, if sometimes just subtly enough for internet trolls to miss the point.
There are illegal immigrants pouring into this country every day, and any one of them could be a super terrorist.
Starlight, however, still has to put up with a grotesquely sexualized costume for most of 2 seasons. The TV show doesn't abuse Starlight as much as the comics, leaving it up to fans to figure out why her costume is still impractical as hell. But the biggest switch up for Starlight is her throwing the outfit into the garbage for the season 3 finale. This is a costume controversy done right. As the premiere of Loki kicks into gear, our new variant Loki undergoes processing as a prisoner of the Time Variance Authority. He loses his armor and suffers a police-style interrogation and a lifetime highlight reel that drives him to tears. It's a metaphor for being stripped down to his essentials. Thematically, it makes perfect sense. This won't be the same Loki we last saw dead at Thanos' feet. This one is forced to admit that his strongest illusions were cast around himself. The rest of the season slaps him in a UPS guy outfit thought up by costume designer Christine Wada. It's a credit to Hiddleston's endless charm that he still makes this thing look good. However, fans who are a little too in love with Loki's hot goth fashion were upset by his new salaryman style. The thematic meaning went ignored, and things got so ridiculous that a small but vocal cabal of fans now declare that their Loki died in 2013's Thor: The Dark World. They continue to mock the new variant as a Larry. Their loss.
The Green Goblin has one of those costumes that works on the page much more easily than in real life. It's supposed to be deranged tycoon Norman Osborn in what's effectively a Halloween costume and mask. In the comic medium, that mask can be as expressive and realistic as any given artist wants to make it. In reality, a criminal in a rubber mask might be less visceral to see. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man tried to come up with an alternative that would make sense within the world of a movie, going with the notion that Osborn would wear green armor to increase his strength and design a helmet reminiscent of his own tribal mask collection. Unfortunately, fans derisively described the appearance as resembling a Power Ranger, and given their own tacky reputation in the early 2000s, this wasn't exactly a compliment. Willem Dafoe's committed performance helped people overlook their issues with the design, though many fans wondered why Raimi would bother to put a mask over Dafoe, as his face actually looks like a sinister goblin when he grins just right. At long last, in Marvel Studios' Spider-Man: No Way Home, he kept his natural deranged face and donned a purple hood to look more like the comics. However, in honor of the many fans of the Raimi movies, the power armor underneath it all remained.
I just want to kill you myself. Attaboy.
If there's one thing that can be said for the leather costume worn by Ben Affleck in 2003's Daredevil movie, it's that it's slightly easier to look at than the full-body blindfold worn by Rex Smith in the 1989 TV movie The Trial of the Incredible Hulk. Unfortunately, that's rather faint praise, and the 2003 costume ultimately turned out looking more like bondage gear than most super suits. It seems that the film's director, Mark Steven Johnson, was well aware of this fact, telling Yahoo that he found it particularly challenging to be faithful to the character's original spandex-heavy aesthetic. He explained, "We ultimately settled on leather because it was the most practical. Like, if you're riding a motorcycle and you go down, leather is going to protect you the most. But it was also easy for it to come off looking like S&M, and the horns didn't help." Johnson went on to explain that he credits the new costume worn by Charlie Cox in the Marvel Cinematic Universe as an improvement, acknowledging that it has a tasteful balance of protective practicality and that signature leathery style.
Following the fairly positive response to the previous Marvel shows on Netflix, Iron Fist was released in 2017 to a considerably less enthusiastic reception. Despite a handful of decent action scenes, fans and critics largely balked at the show's wandering storyline, weak performances, and lack of a strong villain. In short, it made for a middling lead-in to The Defenders, which was Marvel Television's attempt to recreate the crossover magic of the Avengers film on the small screen. The show may have scored more points with audiences if its protagonist wore his famous green and yellow costume from the comics. Instead, he wore regular street clothes, which did nothing to garner favor with fans of the source material. Sure, the Netflix versions of the characters were more gritty and down-to-earth, but that doesn't mean the show's creators couldn't have done something more with it. Danny Rand's on-screen look felt like a slap in the face to many who followed the character for years and waited patiently for a live-action iteration. As CBR's Sean Aitchison wrote, although there was an in-story justification for the absence of Danny's costume, it still felt like a pretentious rejection of Iron Fist's comic roots. If not for his chest tattoo and his glowing fists, it would be impossible to realize that Danny was actually the immortal Iron Fist. By 2017, the Marvel Cinematic Universe could seemingly do no wrong. Considering the massive success achieved by largely obscure characters like Ant-Man and the Guardians of the Galaxy, Marvel Studios decided to bring the Inhumans to the big screen. However, plans changed, and they were shuffled over to the small screen in the form of an 8-episode miniseries. Still, the studio had struck gold with its shared universe of Netflix series and ABC's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., so what could go wrong here? As it turns out, pretty much everything. Inhumans was absolutely destroyed by critics and fans alike who ridiculed almost every aspect of the show, from the characterization, to the story, to the tone, and more. But even before the series was unleashed on an unsuspecting public, one aspect was singled out: the suits. As soon as an official still from the series was released, social media users ripped costume designs to pieces like a pack of hungry piranha. Their disgust was understandable. Before Inhumans, Marvel Studios had largely spared no expense when it came to visualizing characters for live action. But what we got here was not of the same standard. Actor Jordan Ross took to X, formerly known as Twitter, to joke about how the cosplay looked great. Deathlok was never an A-list Marvel Comics character, but having been around since the 1970s, he's had enough of an audience to justify his appearances over the years. Many characters have taken on the Deathlok identity, but the main qualities they've all shared are that they were once dead humans who were revived with advanced technology and given an arsenal of deadly cybernetic weapons. The style most associated with Deathlok is that of a corpse-like figure with futuristic armor and half their face covered in deadly machinery. It's a pretty heavy metal look that's reminiscent of the T-800 from the Terminator films, so there was a precedent when it came to realizing this character in live-action form. Unfortunately, Deathlok's grand live-action debut on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. left fans wanting more. In fact, a lot more. In the show, he is a regular man named Mike Peterson who was turned into a cyborg with expensive high-tech abilities by Hydra experimentation. Hydra apparently had its funding cut, so they outfitted Peterson with plastic armor that made him look like a Power Rangers villain. Viewers do get the occasional glimpse of his metallic interior, but it feels like they pulled back to ground the character more.
Long before Sony started making movies like Venom about characters from the Spider-Man franchise without actually featuring Spider-Man himself, DC tried to make a movie featuring a character from the Superman universe without Superman. In comics, the character Steel was John Henry Irons, one of 4 Superman-esque heroes who appeared after the original Superman's death at the hands of Doomsday. Irons didn't pretend to be Superman, but he wore a caped metal suit that made him resemble a literal Man of Steel and carried a large hammer in homage to folk hero John Henry. In the movies, however, he's played by Shaquille O'Neal wearing armor that even Tony Stark would reject outright. With no contemporary Superman on the big screen, the movie Steel depicts Irons as a brilliant weapons designer who must protect the inner city when a fellow soldier steals his arsenal and sells it to criminals. 9 years before Iron Man hit the big screen with a nearly identical concept, this inventor, upset with the misuse of this tech, develops a powered-up suit of armor to fight evil. Without Superman, the film ditched the cape, and in order to showcase Shaq's acting, Steel's full head mask got replaced with a metal cowl that strongly resembled Batman's without the ears. Evidently, the technology to do a full-body motion capture suit wasn't ready in 1997, and the cumbersome results speak for themselves.